And you, as the teacher, your job is to monitor and facilitate student learning. You are not there to be the sage on the stage and give them the information. You are there to guide them to find their own answers. You are there because you have a lot more experience, both with the content, obviously, but also in the real world, so you can give them advice. You can point them in the right direction, but do not give them the answers to things. If they would like to know the best way to create some small housing, for example, let's go back to the homeless problem. Let's say they want to create some small houses for these people. Don't tell them how to do the best way to do that. Point them in the right direction. In that case, you might want to look at an expert. DCIT has some wonderful, brilliant carpenters, and we've got some awesome people who know how to build stuff. They are literally building a house out of DCIT, and it is outstanding. So if you're doing anything like that, send them an email, give them a call. Try and set up a time for either you to take your class out there or for them to come talk to your class about the best way to do these things. That way, your students are getting the information, but they are getting it from an expert and they are getting it on their own. They are not just you giving them the answer. Too long our educational system has been, let me give you the answer and then you regurgitate it to me. The world doesn't work like that anymore. Then you need to assess the outcome. You are assessing the final outcome. It does not matter how much work they put into this project. If the project does not meet the standards, then it's not good enough and they need to fix it. This is something that one of the main things about PBL. You are not simply turning something in. You are turning in something good. So then you need to assess the outcome. In order to assess the outcome, because this is a project, you need to have a rubric. We're going to talk about rubrics in a second and why they're so important, but you need a rubric for your final.
They're really helpful because if you don't have any sense of direction, the rubrics give you a guide for what you need to be working for specifically. Without the rubrics, a lot of people would be lost and wouldn't know how necessarily to begin or to follow through in a project.
If you don't know anything about collaborating or working in a group, then if you look at the rubric, then it'll tell you everything you have to do to make a perfect group member.
What's hard about the 4 C's is that so often teachers will say, I don't know how to assess these. Because it's not immediately obvious how to measure collaboration or how to measure critical thinking, sometimes it falls by the wayside.
The rubric scale provides the criteria for success. What specific actions that teachers can see our students doing to show us that they actually know the material.
The rubrics allow us to really make sure that every assessment really gets at all of those higher level thinking skills that we want to have kids see.
I think the rubrics have been very helpful in refining what proficiency looks like so that you're not on your own as a teacher deciding, I think it looks like this for this assignment. The rubric tells you these are the skills that you're looking for and this is the level that makes it proficient.
We use a lot of the systems thinking rubrics, or we manipulate those rubrics so it fits our classroom and what we're doing.
The rubric is really clear, and I think it helps the students see the need to think about how am I choosing the correct tools, how am I choosing the correct message, and helps them to see that difference between proficient and excellent.
We've had the kids use rubrics too and design rubrics on their own. They know what their expectation is when the rubric is there, and so it pushes them that much further to reach their learning goals on their own.
Modeling is important. If I just gave them the document, they would never understand what they had to do. So looking at models and giving them feedback that pertains directly to the rubric criteria and having them self-assess and assess each other using that criteria.
The rubric is going to eventually kind of wean out and not be a focus, but it will always be there as part of, now remember, how do you work well as a group? And that you need out there in the real world. They're not going to put you in a cubicle and say, solve this problem. They're going to put you with a group of people and say, work together, I want an answer. So they've got to have those skills. They're important.
You really need to create an assessment worth teaching to. And we believe that's what we've done. So now we're starting to see our teachers really buy into this assessment, and they're changing classroom instruction in order to ensure our students are well prepared for not only this assessment, but the challenges they'll have in the future.
Now here's just some quick pointers on rubrics. You should already be pretty familiar with rubrics if you're working in education, but just some quick pointers to make sure everybody's on the same page. First, give them the rubrics early on in the process. You don't want to wait until the last minute to give them the rubric for something. And dear Lord, you do not want to not give them the rubric at all and just grade them on a rubric after they turn their project in that they never even saw. Give them the rubric early, because that's what they're going to use to critique each other. That's what they're going to use to design their projects. Use that rubric for the recursive revision. Like I said, have the students give each other criticism. You can give them criticism that uses that rubric. That way they have a basis for their analysis. They're not just, well, I don't like it, it's not pretty, or something like that. You've got the concrete criteria from that rubric. So when you're using that rubric, use it in your peer editing. Also have audience rubrics. If you're going to present for an audience, or if you're going to have an engineer come in and look at the stuff, or whoever, an expert come in and look at it, give them a rubric, or have them bring their own. A lot of experts would have their own criteria, and either they will have a rubric, or you can say, hey, what criteria do you look for? Let me bang up a rubric for you if your expert is either not familiar with rubrics or doesn't have the time and energy to make one. And also, you want to have your final review be based on that rubric. Your final look at the project is using that rubric. Now, you cannot click on this, obviously, because it's a video, but I'm going to embed this presentation in the Schoology course. There are a lot of rubrics that the Buck Institute for Education has created, and they're right on that link. And the last step for how to implement PBL in your classroom is to evaluate and reflect on the experience. This is for both you and the students. Your students should reflect on it and think back over what they have learned, how they have learned it, how has this prepared them for the real world, how can they use this in the future, did they solve the problem? If not, why? If they did, awesome, what helped them solve the problem? How were they successful? And then how can they use the skills that they've gained in other contexts, in other contents, in other areas in the rest of their life? For you need to reflect on the experience. What went well? What didn't go well? How did your students fare on this project? What could you have done to make it even better? So on and so forth, so that in the future you can do it even better, even more effectively, and help your students. Here are a few example PBL projects. Again, this is not, you obviously can't click on this, but this presentation is in the Schoology course. The first one is High Tech High. High Tech High is very well known for their use of project-based learning. The Buck Institute for Education, I've already referenced them once. And that third one, Zombie Survival, is one that I actually made and used with my 9th grade ELA honors students. Used to great effect. Go find them and ask them about it, and they will sing its praises, although a couple hated it because it made them work really, really hard.